Hello and welcome to Game 4 in our chronological survey of the best games of chess ever played. I'm joined again by Donald Woods, who will help me to analyse the game shortly. We've reached 1892 and a World Championship match played in the unlikely location of Cuba. It surprises many people that Cuba's involvement in major tournament chess stretches back this far, but it has indeed been a consistent host right up to Castro's reign and the staging of the 17th Olympiad, when as a centrepiece a giant cymbal was organised, 6,840 tables, including Castro himself, playing simultaneously. Havana in 1892 was hardly an obvious venue, in turmoil leading up to the Second Cuban Rebellion against Spain just 3 years later. But the players, having travelled from East and West Europe, had to put all this out of their minds. The reigning champion at that time, having become the first official world chess champion in 1886, was Wilhelm Steinitz. Born in Prague, he moved to Vienna, where he tried to make a living as a journalist. The lure of chess, however, proved too strong, and he eventually became a chess professional. In his first international tournament, played in London in 1862, he represented Austria. He subsequently decided to make his home in London, which was rapidly becoming the capital of world chess. Steinitz rapidly became a denizen of Simpsons, where challenges from amateurs helped to augment his income. Once in London, Steinitz dominated British chess. In 1866, he won a match against Anderson, the victor of London 1851, and he went on to crush Bird and Blackburn, two of the leading English masters, in set contests. He continued to work as a journalist, contributing columns for the Field magazine and for Figaro, but his main journalistic effort was as proprietor and editor of the International Chess magazine from 1885 to 1891, a controversial and a distinguished publication that is now a collector's item. In the 1880s, Johann Zukertort emerged to challenge Steinitz's predominance. A fierce rivalry developed between them, and both men claimed to be the world's strongest player. In 1886, the issue was settled in the first World Championship match in America, won overwhelmingly by Steinitz. He was the best player in the world for 8 years, and left a legacy of profound influence on the strategic development of the game. But in 1894, he suffered painful defeat at the hands of the youthful Emanuel Lasker, who, at the age of 25, wrested the World Championship from his veteran opponent. A return match was held in Moscow 2 years later. But it would have been better for Steinitz if he had never played. He lost 10 games, drew 5 and won 2. This stinging humiliation caused a mental breakdown, and he began to insist that he could make telephone calls without the need for any apparatus. Steinitz was briefly interned in the Moscow Morozov Asylum. Mercifully, he recovered and for some years continued to play successfully in tournaments. But in 1900, he died in utter poverty in New York and was given a pauper's burial at the Evergreen Cemetery, Brooklyn. The memory of his final destitution has haunted masters of the game ever since. His opponent in the 1892 World Championship was Mikhail Chigorin. Chigorin was born near St. Petersburg in 1850, where he later founded a chess club. Chigorin was the first Russian player to achieve world prominence. He was a powerfully built individual, fond of the pleasures of life, and the photos which have come down to us portray a fierce-looking man with an aggressive cut to his beard. In decades to come, Chigorin was idolized by the Soviets as the founder of the so-called Soviet School of Chess. In fact, he was nothing of the sort. He was simply a chess professional eking out his living by playing and writing about the game. In 1883, he was placed 4th in the Great London Tournament, and in 1889, he had first unsuccessfully challenged Steinitz for the World Championship. His best tournament results were achieved in the 1890s, including second place in Hastings in 1895. The game I have chosen is the best in the series of World Championship matches between the Austrian and the Russian champions. It was also notable for the bracing refreshments selected by the masters during play. Chigorin was supplied with free brandy and Steinitz with unlimited champagne. Their glasses stood beside the board during play. Steinitz explained later that he drank the champagne under medical advice in order to fortify his nerves. So let's turn to the game. Steinitz is white, Chigorin's black, and for the third time in our series we see the opening move pawn to e4, and again for the third time we see this reply black pawn going to e5. And Steinitz, the founder of the scientific school of chess, brings out his knight, attacking the black pawn, and Chigorin defends the pawn with his knight. A sensible developing move. And now Steinitz chooses bishop b5, the Roy Lopez opening. It's the first Roy Lopez we've seen in the series. Donald, do you ever play the Roy Lopez?
Yes, quite often, Ray. In fact, it's still quite popular on the league circuit, although I've been flirting increasingly with the English opening recently. I feel it's only right. I've lived in Britain for 12 years.
Mm-hmm. Well, the point of the Roy Lopez, it was developed by the Spanish priest called Roy Lopez in the 16th century. The point is to attack the black knight on c6 and ultimately place long-term pressure against the black pawn on e5. It's a very advanced, sophisticated opening. It's a favourite of people like Anatoly Karpov, and when Bobby Fischer was playing, he used it a lot as well. And it's sometimes called the Spanish torture because of the long defence black has to go in for to repel white's attack. It's also perhaps the most subtle opening on the chessboard, and it's said amongst masters and grandmasters, if you can understand the Roy Lopez, you're on the way to becoming a master or a grandmaster. And nowadays, almost invariably, black plays this move, putting the question, as they say, to the white bishop. But in the 19th century, they hadn't worked out the nuances of this opening, and Chigorin developed his knight. It's a sensible move. It's probably not the best or the most flexible, but there's nothing wrong with it. And nowadays, faced with this, white would tend to castle. And there are various good reasons, too complex and long-winded to go into here, why black shouldn't take the pawn on e4. But Steinitz, as we'll see later in the game, as part of his general theory of chess, in fact, one might see Steinitz as the Einstein of chess. He had a general theory of chess, as Einstein had the general theory of relativity. As part of Steinitz's general theory, he said you shouldn't castle too early. You should wait and see where your opponent puts his king, and then if possible, you should consider castling on the other side.
The other side?
The other side, because that gives you the chance to push the pawns forwards against the place where your opponent's king has sought safety. So Steinitz's next move is absolutely in keeping with the general theory. He defends the pawn, he maintains a closed setup in the middle of the board, and he defers the decision as to where he's going to put his king. He's saying to Chigorin, I'm going to wait, I'm going to develop my pieces, I'm going to have a solid position, I want to see where you castle.
Open. Yes.
Exactly. See where you castle, I'm going to attack you. Now, he's not saying it very loudly, and Chigorin probably didn't hear him. Because obviously, if you telegraph your intentions too obviously, the opponent can do something about it. But this, in essence, is what he's saying. And many games from this period, you can see Steinitz deferring the decision as to where to put his own king, waiting for the opponent to castle, and then going for it. And Chigorin plays this. He's also lending protection to the pawn on e5. And Steinitz makes this little move. He's still waiting as to where to put his king. And also he's making a retreat square, should it become necessary, for the bishop. The bishop can now drop back to a4, perhaps come into here if it's attacked.
I was wondering about that, because after d3, it seemed to cut that diagonal.
Yes. The c3 is exactly in Steinitz's style. You know, it supports a later advance by d4 by white. It keeps his options open. It allows the bishop to retreat. It's a typical Steinitz move. And now Chigorin plays this. We've seen this before, the fianchetto, or fianchetto of the bishop. And he's very much saying that he's going to castle kingside. You tend, when you make a fianchetto like this on the kingside, the flank development of the bishop, you're more or less saying
pretty clear signal, yeah.
Pretty clear signal. And out comes the white knight. You'll see Steinitz still doesn't castle. Bishop goes to g7. And then a very unusual move, knight f1. I can't think of anyone before Steinitz who would have played this move. In fact, I can't think of anyone now who played this move. It's so unusual to move this knight all the way over to the king's side quite so early.
Except insofar as you've already explained how his mind's working, that's where he's going to go down, isn't it?
That's right.
He's going to castle queenside, so He's getting his stuff ready on that side.
That's right. And by modern standards, this would be seen as intolerably slow. But in those days, the opponents didn't understand what he was doing, and he could catch people in these long-range strategic traps. And now, Black played this innocent-looking move. He castled. In fact, there's nothing wrong with it at all. But it gives Steinitz the grist that he needs for his mill. And now he brings the bishop back. And again, it's a difficult move to explain. It's really only explicable in the sense that he wants to bring, as you said, Donald, all the pieces to the king side. And even this bishop that's become so isolated, as it were, on the extreme left flank,
now becomes part of that.
Is being brought back. Everything is being switched to the right-hand side of the board. And Chigorin made a sensible move. Nothing wrong with this. The knight is going to come perhaps to here later on. It's a good central post. It'll chase the bishop away. And in some senses too, he's preparing this sort of thrust, where he uses the fact that he's castled to attack on the king side. Now, if White had castled on the king side already,
yes,
very useful. But he hasn't committed himself, so although this is an aggressive option for Black in the future, it's still not clearly something that's totally desirable.
In fact, well, I guess that Steinitz would be rather glad he's done that, wouldn't he?
Yes, I mean, Steinitz was really hoping Black would weaken himself in that way. And he continues to maneuver, and he brings up the knight to e3. And now his knights are in very good central squares, looking at the king side. And for example, this knight, it might hop in to the d5 square, again, glancing towards the black king side.
Now, Ray, I can give you an insight into us average club players, you see. We'd go along with that up to that point, but I think the bishop would have been moved before the knight move. You know,
the bishop on c1.
Yes, try and clear, if we're going to castle queen side, try and get the interference out of the way first. And of course, that's what makes the difference between us and these great geniuses.
Yes, Steinitz has this strange indifference to developing the bishop. And he's got his plan.
Do it
he's
in his own
implementing
good time.
Inexorably. And Black played this. It's a good move. It attacks the bishop. We've seen in Program 3 that giving up a bishop gratuitously in the opening is a bad idea. Giving the opponent the advantage of two bishops is a dreadful mistake. Steinitz knew that very well, better than anybody else at the time, and he brings back the bishop. Now, here I think Black starts to go wrong. So far I think Chigorin's play has been really impeccable. There's nothing wrong with it. He's fallen in perhaps a little bit too readily with Steinitz's plans about castling, but there's nothing else wrong at all. And now I think he should try to exploit the fact that he's got all these pieces on the queen side, and maybe a move like this will be very good, and then perhaps try to push the pawn on to use the fact that his knights are bunched up on the queen side.
He shouldn't be at this stage too worried about being pretty weak along H there, should he?
No, because if White is going to attack on the king side, he must castle on the queen side.
Right.
And by making a move like this,
he
would already discourage White from doing that. He forced White to think more in terms of castling the other side.
Yeah.
And there are other moves, but what Chigorin does now is perhaps a little bit too passive and falling in too readily with White's plans. He moves the knight to here. And now Steinitz seizes his chance. This move. Excellent, vigorous move.
There's no messing around.
That's right. And now we see the pawn is going to advance against the black king. There's a little foot soldier with a torch in his hand waiting to set fire to the residence of the black king. And behind that pawn, don't forget, the rook.
Sorry.
And once the rook is coming into play as well, this means trouble. And Chigorin played this.
Alarm bells ringing.
Alarm bells ringing. He's bringing over the knights to defend his king, but he's also planning, in some circumstances he's still thinking of this move, though he's perhaps thinking about it less than before, but he's also thinking about a well-known rule in chess that when the opponent attacks on the edge, you counterattack in the center. He's thinking about breaking with this, which is pretty sensible.
That's a matter of who beats who to the punch, then.
Steinitz pushes on. And Chigorin, ignoring it, strikes back in the middle. In principle, this is the right way to get counterplay. And now Steinitz takes on g6. And now we see, this is one of the most important moments in the history of chess thinking, Donald. It's this game that teaches people forever afterwards that given the choice, if you can capture with a pawn away from the centre or towards the centre, you do it towards the centre.
Yes.
What black should do now is he should take this way, towards the centre. Chigorin, a romantic player, an aggressive player, is still thinking in terms of the earlier players of the 19th century, the great romantic attacks, the king's gambits where you attack on the f-file and so on. And he makes a principal error, and this turns out to be absolutely fatal. He takes back away from the centre, away from the middle of the board. And although it gives the black rook the action it wants on the f-file, we now start to see imperceptibly the files and the diagonals towards the black king being undermined, especially, for example, the a2 to g8 diagonal. At the moment, you'll say to me, it's crowded with pieces. How can it be weak? But in a minute, we'll see it is weak. And quite quickly. And Steinitz just trades off here. And this is the first link in the operation to expose that critical diagonal. Chigorin takes back. Steinitz takes off. And the queen takes back. And things are beginning to look all right for black. His queen's in the middle.
Yes. Yes.
But now the bishop's come to life. It's attacking the queen, which has to go away. And the knight on e6 is pinned.
Yes.
The queen comes here. And now we'll see gradually that white's delaying tactics, not castling, are going to bear fruit. And Chigorin puts a little bait in white's path. He offers the pawn on e5 as a sop to Cerberus. But of course, if white did that, he'd be opening up the whole board for black's pieces. Of course, Steinitz ignores it. And he plays the move that you were thinking of before, bringing out the bishop. But now look at the coordination of the white forces. Look how things have improved. You know, by waiting, he's chosen the optimum moment for bringing this piece into the game.
Did Steinitz always delay casting?
Often, yes, yes. And it was such a key plank in his system to delay castling and work out where the other king was going to go. And now the bishop on b3 pins the knight on e6. Chigorin has to break the pin, otherwise he can't move anything. But of course now the king
is
in the firing line of the white rook on h1. And as you so rightly said, the delay of the castling. Now, you know what move number this is, Donald? 19. He's got 19 moves without castling. And if he was a schoolboy now learning chess, the master would have caned him.
So very bad, yes.
But still things don't look too black for Chigorin. He brings over his rook into the centre, massing his pieces for defence, looking indirectly at the white queen. For example, you know, a move like this could be in the offing fairly soon. So Steinitz, very cleverly, drops his queen back.
Question, right?
Yeah.
Why not at the stage bishop h6?
Yes, he could play bishop h6, but exchanging pieces too quickly. Actually,
and his rook right up then.
Yes, I think he actually needs more pieces on the board at the moment.
Okay.
I think that if he trades off the pieces too fast, he's letting the initiative go. So bishop h6 is certainly a good move, storing up energy in a very clever way. And now, at long last, Chigorin plays this, the move I recommended before. Attacking on the wing, but now it's Steinitz's turn, and he goes in the centre. And this is so subtle.
He can switch to either.
Yes. It's so subtle that he's been building up against the king all the time, but now he combines this with a central attack to break through against the black king. And he takes it. He takes d4. Knight takes d4. And Chigorin takes it off. Bishop takes d4. And now he takes with the rook.
Yes, now I bet 9 out of 10 club players would have taken with the bishop here.
They would.
Yeah.
And it would have been good, but this is even
including
stronger.
this one.
And now Chigorin snaps at the bait. he takes the rook.
Not to give the check.
And he must have been expecting that white would play bishop on e3, takes d4 check.
Yes.
And this could happen, bishop takes d4
Yeah.
check, and the rook would parry.
Yeah.
It's a good position for white,
Yeah.
but it's not what he could have. And now comes the move that makes this game one of the greatest. It looks as if white's going to seize the central diagonals and turn right against the black king. Instead, he suddenly goes straight back to the strategy he'd been implementing from the start. And he makes a thunderclap of a move. He takes this off.
Ah. Yeah.
Beautiful. Sensational.
Yeah.
And now it's completely forced what happens. Absolutely forced. Black has to take it. There's no choice at all. King takes h7. And the queen goes to this most unusual attacking square. The king has to go here.
And he's horribly exposed.
He's never taking back on d4.
Right.
He gives a check. The king has no choice. It has to come out. Up comes the queen again from its hole in the corner. Check. The king goes in the middle. And now, at last, he harvests this last piece. Check. The king has to come here. And the coup de grace, elegant, beautiful, and conclusive. Queen f4, checkmate.
It is.
I'm a king hunt with a black king chase right into the middle of the board, almost
Right.
from nowhere. And what a nerve-wracking, tense finale that must have been.
Well, Ray, you know, in your comments from time to time, you talk of moves being prosaic. I guess there were opportunities then when it would have looked like a short-term gain would have been pretty devastating.
Mm.
But compared to this, certainly prosaic. I mean, this is just breathtakingly brilliant, isn't it?
Isn't it? Yes.
Delays everything till just the right moment. It's a masterpiece. Now, this is like a war of nerves, isn't it? And in your introduction, you spoke of the, you know, the nerve aspect of this. Do you grandmasters get as nervous as we do at tournaments?
Dreadfully nervous, yes. Extremely nervous. I mean, many grandmasters have superstitions and things, you know, worried about, you know, numbers 13 and so on. Kasparov is always thinking that the number 13 is good for him. And if he's staying in room number 13 in the hotel, for example, he feels much better. And occasionally...
But you never thought you could send a telephone call without the instrument?
No. I mean, Steinitz, of course, was hyper-nervous. And at that time, he was suffering from the dreadful frustration of losing this match so decisively to Lasker. And what you do find is that when somebody is experiencing a reverse that is quite unexpected, or, you know, perhaps one expects to lose, but not to lose quite so badly, that's when
The jolt is...
the nerves start to give way.
And then eccentricity, I mean, odd things. What's the funniest thing that's ever happened to you?
Well, once I played an opponent who picked up his king and put it in the ashtray by the side of the board instead of moving, which is really remarkable. Anyway, Donald, thanks very much for your contribution this week. Next week, we cross the world again to St. Petersburg, still in the 19th century, for a game featuring the man who took the title from Steinitz, yet another Prussian, Emanuel Lasker. He faced the enigmatic American Harry Pillsbury. Join us for another exciting encounter next week. For now, from Donald and me, goodbye.